Council for Tuesday, April 23rd, 2019. We apologize for the delay. Our RDA meeting went a little bit longer than we had planned. The first item on our agenda is regarding a one-year action plan for Community Development Block Grant and other federal grants for fiscal year 2019-2020. And council members, as you will see from your agenda, we do have a packed agenda with some budget presentations from different departments, and so I would, while I would never say not to talk about issues and not to raise questions, try to be as brief as you possibly can, because we do have a lot that we need to get through. So Ben Ludke is our council policy analyst. He will introduce the CDBG discussion, and Jennifer Schumann from HAND will also join Ben at the table. So Ben, we'll turn the time over to you.
This is the second briefing, and the council is scheduled to vote tonight, and the deadline to act according to HUD is May 1st. So we don't have council meetings between now and May 1st, so action tonight. The council at the April 2nd briefing made several funding shifts totaling $615,115. These are summarized by the table on the big screen, and you'll note that the last one in home relates to Habitat for Humanity. It was a tentative shift pending additional information and discussion between the administration and the organization. Since these funding shifts were made, we have received final award amounts from HUD. Previously, we were working off of estimates. Now we have actual award amounts. CDBG was $93,000 less than we expected. ESG was $8,000 more. Home was $114,000 less, and HOPWA was $61,000 more. So some up, some down based on the estimates. The two advisory boards who provide funding recommendations also provide funding contingencies in case the funding amounts are more or less than expected. Applying those funding contingencies resulted in these shifts as shown in the graph on page, or the table on page 2 of the staff report and up on the big screen. Some went up, some went down. And I want to point out in particular the very top CDBG item for public services, English Skills Learning Center. The decrease would bring it below the $30,000 minimum grant award that the city has as a policy. The reason the policy exists is we need a minimum amount to create that community impact, and if you give less than that, you're not getting as much bang for your buck. So since these tables were put together, the administration has provided a couple of documents. They are in your folders. The first one is a memorandum. Oh.
Walk us through the table since it's on the projector, that'd be helpful.
So implementing the funding contingencies would be a $13,982 decrease for the English Skills Learning Center. And this is, again, the advisory board's recommendation for how to deal with the decrease and where to pull the money from. They also recommended that it would be just over a $60,000 decrease for housing, the HAND multifamily development program, which would leave just over $1 million in the account.
Well, there are copies in the packet.
Well,
So
it's not exactly the same, but
look in your red folder. If council members would like a hard copy, staff can work at printing something out quickly. But if it's okay, I mean, we can push this off on the agenda, or if you're okay having Ben walk you through it until you get your hard copies, we can move forward. Okay, let's move forward, Ben.
Okay.
And then, but still have staff get hard copies.
In each of the 4 grant categories, the advisory boards recommend maximizing the administration amount, and these are limits that HUD sets for each of the grants to say, we're giving you this money and you can have a set percentage of it to administer the grant, because we know there are costs for running these programs, and you can use some of those grant awards to administer the program. So for CDBG, the maximum is 20%, and this would be a reduction of $18,000, which would leave $686,000 to administer the CDBG program next fiscal year. In ESG, it's a 7.5% maximum. Since we have additional money in ESG, this means it's an increase of $605 for the administration line item. The advisory board recommended increasing the Road Homes Rapid Rehousing Program if additional funding was found, and so it was a little over $7,000 that would be added to this program. For home, the funding was less than expected. As a result, the 10% maximum was reduced, $11,487, and the home development fund would be reduced $103,000, so it would have a little over $900,000 remaining. In Hopwa, there was more money than expected, so the administration is capped at 3%, and this increased it by $1,838 to just over $16,000. And then the advisory board recommended splitting the increase between two of the projects by an equal amount. This would be $29,706, and it would be for the tenant-based rental assistance from the County Housing Authority, and then Utah Community Actions salaries, operational support, and rent and utility assistance. So these are the funding shifts based on the actual award amounts. In response to this, the administration took a look at what the impacts would be to these individual programs based on the council's funding shifts and the actual award amounts. And this is, I draw your attention to the handout with the teal strip, which is a summary of what the impacts would be to each of the organizations. And there's also a memo that provides a little more detail, but the teal bar is a summary of the information in that memo. There's also an update from the administration on the conversations with Habitat for Humanity, which is a one-page memo that should also be in your folders. It looks like you found the handouts, making sure they're there. So I'm going to turn it over to the administration to talk about the conversations with Habitat for Humanity, and then they can also discuss the funding shifts that the administration has made. This is an email printout in your folders, and the gist of the administration's revised funding recommendations are to spread the pain of the decreased awards across more projects instead of fewer. Correct.
Great. Jennifer?
So if we could start with shall we start with the spreading the pain, so to speak? As administration looked at this, if we could start with CDBG Public Services, this is again 15% of the overall grant award. And as we looked at keeping in mind that minimum funding level that our community has said is impactful to them, we would like to present an approach that allows for a $1,400 reduction to all of the public services applications, with the exception of those two that are already at the minimum funding level. This again allows us to spread the pain a little bit. $1,400 does not reduce anybody below that $30,000 threshold. Are there any questions about the approach for public services on that section?
Councilmember Mendenhall?
So it's a 15% decrease, right?
No, 15% maximum that can go towards public services.
The actual amount allocated versus what we had hoped for, what's the percent decrease?
It's a $93,000 decrease, which is, let's see, we're looking at about 3% less than we expected.
3%. So that's my question. Did you consider doing a 3% decrease or a proportional approach to the decreases in funding? We go everywhere. We go from 33,000 to 70,000, but everybody's getting the same amount. So did you look at a formulaic approach?
We did not. We can certainly look at that or take that. We can certainly do that.
I mean, it seems like if the intent was to keep things fair, you would go with a percentage approach rather than a dollar amount approach. I'm not arguing one way or another. I'm just saying, 'cause, I mean, you said that, you know, based on fairness, you came up with this plan. But it seems like the fairness thing would be just to decrease the percentage that Councilmember Mendenhall was raising. Just a different approach. Other questions? Comments?
Should we straw poll to ask the administration to come back with that other approach? Or is that something we should just
I
take care of?
had a question just about timing. I thought that we needed to, we need
This
to
is
take
tonight.
action
We have
today.
to take action tonight on it, so I don't think we can send it back. But what we can do is, oh, go ahead, Ben.
I was just going to clarify, the deadline is May 1st, but this is the last regularly scheduled meeting at which you could take action.
Councilmember?
I would still be interested in straw polling it and just seeing if people would like to see a 3% increase instead, and we can
Decrease.
or decrease. I'm sorry, and we can recalculate that surely between now and then. But I would. So I propose that.
Okay, so Councilmember Wharton proposes a straw poll to take this funding chart, but add or assign a percentage, the 3% percentage.
Yes.
0.6 to be precise.
Okay, so the 2.6, so the straw poll would be, do we want to assign the 2.6 decrease across the board equally?
With the exception, I would say, of the properties that are already funded at the minimum level.
Okay, so those funded at the minimum level would not decrease, but everything else would decrease by the 2.7, 2.6? 2.6?
I think it would be slightly higher than that since we
Oh,
aren't
since
changing
you're-
those two.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
Okay, so whatever the percentage
Very
is.
close.
Thumbs up that you would rather okay, let's make it simple. Thumbs up that you would rather go with a percentage as opposed to a dollar amount approach, and then we will work with staff. Our staff will work with administration staff to figure out what that number is before our meeting where we take action tonight. Thumbs up that we support that, thumb down.
I can't vote on that right now, if I may, Mr. Chair.
Absolutely. Councilmember
Only because
Fowler.
I mean, then are we going to vote on whether it's the percentage or what they've proposed? I mean, I would like to see the numbers and see how it actually affects, I understand the equity, but I feel like we're last minuting it, and it makes it so I'm having some difficulties.
Yeah, and I would say that we are last minuting it, but I think we're working within, the time frame and the parameter that we have. The administration went with a dollar amount approach, and so the question really is, do we want to go with the dollar amount approach or do we want to go with the percentage approach? Time frame, both of them are, I don't think
They're
going
both
with the percent,
rushed.
they're both very rushed.
Sure.
so I just think we should, because we're dealing with different amounts. I think it's fair that everybody feels. The administration said we want to spread the hurt, and I think everyone should feel the same magnitude of hurt. And this is really the only way to do that. So,
Councilmember Wharton, I know that Councilmember Mendenhall has an idea that she wanted to.
I wonder if, to help us be able to have our eyes on it in a work session before we get across the hall to vote, if we could take a straw poll, ask staff if they have the capacity to go crunch some numbers, bring it back to us at the end of the work session so we could reopen this and look at those numbers. Would that help, Councilmember Fowler?
I'm still processing this, so. I mean, I understand the purpose behind it, but I also understand that it looks to me like, sort of for the most part, they tried dollar amounts, and I just want to try to give people the most money we can give them, but I understand the rationale behind doing a percentage versus a dollar amount, so I'm still just kind of processing a little bit in my brain.
well, and I think this is just to add, I think it's an easy way to explain to what happened, as opposed to two people who come and are like, well, I had 58,600 and the person, I had 44,600 and then there was another group that was 58,600 and you took the same amount from both of us. Like, obviously I'm feeling that hurt more than they are. So I think it's easier to go to the groups and say, look, this is how it came back. the only way to make sure that everybody felt the same hurt was to do it by percentage instead of by number.
And the reason that I would be supportive of the percentage approach is because there are massive discrepancies here. I mean, you look under housing number 1, assist emergency home repair. Their request was 384,851. They are decreased 15,149. The same amount that housing number 2, the Community Development Corporation of Utah program operations, was decreased at the same amount, even though they were only at 53,000.
Yeah.
So, I would say let's look at the numbers. What we decide to do. I mean, we can take the information across the hall, but I think it would be worthwhile to at least have staff look at those numbers. Councilmember Johnston.
I think we should probably ask staff if it's even feasible at this point.
Yes, for me.
So, about 2 hours. If the administration's comfortable with Jennifer and I working, I think we can figure that out.
Are there other items that we need Ben on before we send him off?
I mean, is this the most pressing thing we've got?
So let's go through this, and then we'll come back and straw poll it. But I haven't noted that we will straw poll this before we move on to the discussion, the next one. So,
You guys have convinced me.
do we have other issues that we want to bring up?
I may have
regarding
missed this. I
process?
apologize, Mr. Chair.
Sorry, Councilmember.
I may have missed this earlier, but can you tell me how you figured out the 1,400 to the 15,000 to the 103.18? Those.
Oh, going down the list, each of those sections have different limitations that we have to think about and consider
Yeah.
as we look at regulations. And so that's why it's broken up that way. Public services is its own category. Housing is approached differently. And then each grant is approached differently as well.
So there's, if I'm taking that correctly, then you'd have to take each of these sections and do them independently for a percentage. Is that right?
Correct.
Yes.
And then make sure that adds up to exactly the amount we're trying to replace.
Mhm.
So it's a little more complicated than I think just doing that haircut kind of concept. So that's why I'm a little worried about making a rush. I understand the rationale, and I'm not opposed to that, but under the current circumstances, it seems like a difficult ask in a very compressed time frame wrought with problems.
Mr. Chair, if I could.
Councilmember, or not Councilmember, David.
That's more than one time, Mr. Chair. I guess I did used to serve in a legislative function.
You did.
Yeah.
And you've forgotten so quickly.
Before we decide on that, as long as I have this universal we that I like to use, which means I don't have to do anything and everyone else has to do everything. As long as Jen feels comfortable in crunching some numbers quickly, then I trust that we can do it. But if we could finish going through because these are different categories, and I just want to emphasize, I appreciate the recognition that's just a different approach, right? So on this first category, our focus was keeping those 30,000, those minimum levels, and then spreading in that category the cut. Instead of percentage-wise, we just looked at what that was applied across all. And so, but if Jen could maybe finish going through the next category, the next two categories, and I wanted to address the Habitat for Humanity's piece, then we could decide whether you want us to crunch those numbers or not.
So if the rest of you are okay taking the straw poll at the end of the discussion, we can go through and hear the rest of it. Do any of you have questions before we move forward? Okay.
Great. So in the housing section of CDBG, the approach was to look at sorry, let me back up. On April 2nd, when we met, council discussed making cuts to specific programs in order to fund other ones that were not recommended. So we looked at that approach, and instead of continuing to decrease those programs that had already suffered a decrease, we looked to spread, again, a dollar amount approach, spread that across the 4 programs that had not been decreased. So the numbers that you're seeing to the right, 384,000, 53,000, those are what the allocations would be with that reduction.
Questions about this piece? Okay.
As we move into administration, again, it's just truing up the maximum that we can do. So with a reduction of the overall grant, there will be a reduction of the administration component.
Cindy?
Okay, so right now, what's on the screen, Ben, help me here, this is the administration's recommendation after the council had completed their recommendation.
Correct.
So the council's made a recommendation, and now you're working off of the administration's recommendation. And so what the administration is recommending here is that in the places where, here's a question mark at the end of this, is it that where the administration recommended a higher amount, that you're recommending the increase or the decrease come from that? Or is it where the council recommended a higher amount, you're recommending the decrease come from that?
So if I could maybe,
Yeah, honestly don't know.
Mr. Chair, no, it's a great question. So the factor, as you're pointing out, between what the council recommendation, the straw poll is taken on April 2nd, is these actual amounts that we received, right? So on this particular funding, on April 2nd, the council shifted some funding from two items, $100,000. I don't have the title right, from one of the hand proposals to NeighborWorks, and then $196,000 from the is it up there?
The hand multifamily?
The multifamily to the Housing Authority. So when we went back and looked at the actual amounts, what our recommendation on this is to spread the additional cuts to those items that were not reduced on April 2nd and not give additional reduction to those items that had already been reduced. So for example, looking at housing number 1, assist, what the council did on April 2nd was add $25,000 from the hand item to assist. And so we're recommending that assist receive a proportional cut because it was not reduced April 2nd.
Okay.
Same thing if you look at the NeighborWorks line item.
Okay.
So, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
If the council hadn't made any funding decisions yet, I would think you would have come back with a list of equal percentage or equal number reductions for all of these. Is that correct?
Actually, what Ben showed initially was what the CDCIP board proposed in reductions as a contingency if anticipating that HUD could reduce, right? So we didn't feel that was as relevant because it did not account for what happened on April 2nd. So if the reductions had not been made on April 2nd, we most likely would have just come back with what the CDCIP board had proposed as their contingency.
Okay, so what I'm trying to understand is, are you only taking the reduction in places where the city council made a policy decision to add money?
We are making a reduction in areas that did not receive any reduction on April 2nd.
Okay, so let me, let's move forward because and then I'm going to address this piece when we come back to our straw poll.
So if I could just maybe clarify, a good example of what I'm saying is the Community Development Corporation of Utah program operations on this listed under housing number 2, the $53,000, that was what the CDCIP board recommended. That was left the same on April 2nd. But because they did not receive a reduction, when we got the actual amounts, we applied a reduction to their application as well.
Okay. Councilmember Johnson.
Can I ask a question along this line then?
Yeah.
So if I look at NeighborWorks number 5, was that the council's change recommendation to add 100,000, then that get decreased by 15?
Correct.
So I think that's what's throwing it off a little bit, saying, so that was to make that change, and then to pull it away from the change that was made, that makes it a little confusing, I guess, in some ways.
Sure.
Okay.
Just to reiterate, the advisor for this housing section, these 4 $15,000 decreases, the advisory board's recommendation was that the full $60,000 would be taken out of the hand multifamily item.
And that was from the CDCIP.
That was from the advisory board,
Advisory
CDCIP, correct. The administration's revised recommendation is to split them across these 4, 3 of which the council added funding to on April 2nd.
Again, just to clarify, because the CDCIP board's recommendation did not account for any changes April 2nd. So if we take the whole $60,000 from the multifamily, that in essence is a 200, please don't quote my math, it's a $250,000 something cut to that one line item.
Okay, go ahead, Councilmember Fowler.
Right, which I understand. I guess I'm just wondering, you know, the council made these decisions on April 2nd to move sort of money around to be able to fund some areas a little bit higher than others. And now that we're kind of talking about these discrepancies and how this was done, I'm in more full support of a percentage, but across all of them. I think, and maybe that's something we need to discuss. We did take money away from the multifamily development and from the housing rehabilitation homebuyer program. So it would be adding more money to take away from them. And I guess that needs to be sort of a policy discussion, or we need to discuss that as well, it seems to me, on if we're asking staff to go and do a percentage on this instead of a dollar amount, is that across the board, including those that we kind of changed or shifted on April 2nd, or not? Except those that maybe would fall below that $30,000 threshold. And I'm posing that as a question to the chair. Is that something that we need to?
Well, and so here's, so based on that, based on the discussion that we're having and the discussion that we've heard, and also, you know, David, I want to acknowledge that we have, you know, received your memo and an explanation about, you know, what the justification was, and you know, not the concern, but some of the issues that were raised about our straw polls. What I would like to do right now, just because of the time frame that we're working in, and because of the discussions that this council has already had, one of the things that I think is important to remember is that, you know, the recommendations from the CDCIP board then go to the mayor. The mayor will then make recommendations based on the CDCIP board. Oftentimes those don't change, sometimes they do. Those recommendations, the mayor's recommendations, then come to the council, and the council then deliberates and decides which of the projects are going to be funded and which are not. We went through that process. It was a very public process. We had a number of straw polls that we went through where we weighed these, you know, the different you know, issues, and we made those decisions. That was the prerogative of the council. The administration has come back and you know, has disagreed with some of those straw polls that were done in a memo, and that is, you know, completely, you know, the administration's prerogative to do that. As a council and as the chair, my feeling is that we have spent you know, quite a bit of time talking about these things. There are, you know, fundamental disagreements that we may have with the administration. We appreciate, we duly note the issues that you've raised to us. The explanation of this has done more to unsettle me than to make me feel better about it, because you are using your judgment call. The administration's using its judgment call, ignoring what the CDCIP board is doing, even though you told us that we needed to, you know, to remember what the CDCIP board did. Take that into consideration with what the administration has done. We've done that. When we have limited resources, limited federal resources, and there are requirements of those federal resources and spending federal money. As a city, we do not fund we do not fund different programs. This is the one area that we have where we can use federal money to fund programs. And it concerns me when I see other community programs being cut for whatever reasons, while administration budgets are being increased. It doesn't mean that HAND is not doing a good job. It doesn't mean that that's not doing good, but HAND also receives general fund money, whereas a lot of these other projects do not. This is the one opportunity that we can work with the community, and that is, I think, what we did and what was discussed in our meeting when we went through and prioritized this. My recommendation, council, is that we move forward with the straw poll that Councilmember Wharton and Councilmember Mendenhall raised, but I would like to change it a little bit based on what Councilmember Fowler brought up. And what I would like us to straw poll is that we look to have a percentage decrease across the board on everything except for those programs funded already at the minimum. If the programs, the $30,000 programs that are already at a minimum, those programs would not be reduced in funding, but all of the other programs, including the HAND programs, would be defunded to the same tune that everybody else in the community is going to be dealing with. As far as the issue with NeighborWorks and some of the issues and concerns that have been raised there, one of the things that there will be a motion in the formal meeting that we could make that would essentially take the, in light of what the administration has raised with NeighborWorks, and in light of NeighborWorks' response, instead of funding the full NeighborWorks amount, you would fund half, up front when we fund the other programs, with the remaining half to be funded when they're able to provide proof of the repayment of their federal issues that don't deal, they couldn't use this money that we'd be spending anyway to do that. But the conditions would be that they would have to come back and show that, through an independently outside audit by a firm, recognize that they've done that, and then they would have access to the remaining half. Yeah, so 50 up front, or 50 when the rest is funded, and then 50 at a later date when, when the contingent, when they've met the issues, then we'd fund the rest of it. So that would be on the agenda for later this afternoon. But in order to, we're now at 5 o'clock. We're planning on voting on this at 7 o'clock. In order to give staff time, what I'd like to do is straw poll whether we have them do that, where everything would be decreased at an equal rate, except for those projects that are funded at the minimum.
Council
Thumbs
Chair,
up that you support that, some down, yes.
we add in the Habitat for Humanity component because that is pertinent to this
If I could give,
as well.
Let's straw poll this, and then you can do the Habitat, because the Habitat for Humanity, if we do poll that, you'll still have to figure the amount out. So, Councilmember Mendenhall.
I'm sorry, you're talking about going through the 1 through 7 on housing alone. That's the straw poll, or is
The
it
straw
also?
poll would be what we have here. So the reductions in CDBG
For public services
and
as well?
home.
Okay.
No, just for because the others, the ESG and Hopwell weren't.
But I'm sorry,
impacted.
CDBG includes public services and
Yep.
housing.
Yep.
And you're straw polling for that
Yep.
in entirety. I just want to mention that I recognize that the 1.1 on housing number 6 and the 450 on housing number 7 are reductions from the mayor's proposal. They're 200,000 and 100,000 less. So I wanted to recognize that.
Okay, so is everyone clear on what the straw poll is, Councilmember Johnston?
Yeah, I am going to recuse myself from the ESG discussion in a moment, I
Okay.
assume. I am, so understand, we're going to ask for them to come back with the new figures based on a percentage reduction across all these areas, right? Are we going to have enough time to understand the impacts on each of those programs for that?
Cindy had a comment that she wanted to make.
I'll answer your last question first, which is no. The doing it by percentage, though, does prevent it from being sort of like sales tax, being regressive, affecting the lowest income people
Sure.
the most. So that's one thing you could do to mitigate. No, I don't think you will have time to see the impact. And one thing, I'm not sure if our staff is going to have time to participate in calculating each item, because Ben is the staff person on our next agenda item. But what I think we could craft a detailed enough motion, as I was writing it down here, what you're telling us you'd like to do, that you want a percentage decrease across the board to all categories in the first section and all categories in the second section, public works and housing, except for those at the minimum.
Yep.
And I think we could apply that motion, and then the finance people can get together afterwards and come up with the exact numbers. And if we've done that before on cases like this, as long as you're very specific, I think you don't have to have the exact number, but I'm hoping there's an attorney that will jump out of his or her seat and tell me if I'm wrong.
I get the rationale. I'd like to be a little more conscientious about the effects of what we're doing.
Mr. Chair, if I
So-
could respond to Councilmember
Sure.
Johnston's question. So I just want to clarify something that Ben said. The information that was provided to you that shows the impact does not include the additional cuts. So what you do have in front of you is the impacts based on the April 2nd. I also want to say, Mr. Chair, I apologize, if I should apologize, that the memo that we sent is being read as being argumentative or disagreeing with the council's action. I would ask you to please take another look at the memo. It was not intended to make a judgment on any action that the council took on April 2nd. It was merely an attempt to provide an impact statement so that you would have full information in making the final decisions. There's nothing in the memo that says to you that we disagree with any action taken, whether there's disagreement or not. But the memo and the intent behind the memo was merely to provide additional information. And I just furthermore say that the recommendations in terms of the administration on these additional cuts, because of the change in the environment with last week receiving the actual numbers, was again, just you can accept the recommendation or not. And it was not the intent of the administration to try and protect the administration's projects in harm of community organizations and community partnerships. We were recognizing, as Councilmember Mendenhall said, in this particular area, that you already had significant reductions made to 2 areas, and that's why we felt that not making additional reductions there was the best approach forward. That was our recommendation.
No,
it is in your court. You can do what you want
We
with that.
appreciate that, and appreciate the input. One question, and I know this is like the most delayed straw poll vote that I think I've ever done.
And one hell of a story
Andrew,
problem, too.
Councilmember Johnston asked the question about, knowing that raised the point that we wouldn't have time to go back and ask how each of those impacts would be felt by the recipients. Did I get that right?
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
for this particular one, the
Have
neighborhood
you,
works on
so have you talked with all of them on what the impact would be on these reductions? Have you worked with them, or do we know the answer to that? Okay, so either way, we're in the same position where, we don't have a lot of time to, we got the numbers last week, we're moving forward. We don't have time to vet, what the percentage would be, but we also know that this hasn't been vetted either. So we're passing something that hasn't been vetted. That's not the greatest kind of public policy, but in the time frame that we're working with, that's kind of where we are. Councilmember Mendenhall.
That's just the nature of the
Yes.
way this works and when we get the numbers. And it's the same thing with the June 7th, June 8th tax revenue information we get from the state. We have to finalize our budget a week after that, and we get put in this spot with our budget as a whole every year.
And I would say that most applicants, I think, understand that that's kind of the nature of dealing with grant money. Okay, so do I need to restate this motion again, or for the straw poll, or do we want to look at the percentage Thumbs up that you want to look at the percent, or have the staff develop those numbers. Thumbs down that you oppose it.
I,
Okay. Councilmember Johnson votes no, and everyone else votes yes. Councilmember Rogers is out. Okay. Other issues that we need to take care of?
Mr. Chair, if I could
Habitat for
address
Humanity.
or I'm sorry, if I could address Habitat for Humanity.
Yes.
So as asked by council to work with Habitat for Humanity, and if you recall initially this contingent recommendation of moving $250,000 from the Home Development Fund to Habitat based on conversations. You received a memo from the administration. There are two reasons why this does not work, and that's coming directly from Habitat. When they have used home funds before with Salt Lake County, those have been grants. Salt Lake City home dollars are low interest loans, which requires payback via the provider. That is not their model, so that does not fit with their model. The other issue that we were not able to resolve with Habitat was part of their request is also city land, and we talked a little bit about this last time in terms of the need to go through some kind of to go through a public benefit analysis if we were to donate city land to Habitat. The memo does outline that we think those conversations were actually fruitful and that there are other opportunities that we could work with Habitat that would be within their model. But these federal funding dollars do not fit the way that they currently operate.
Okay, and that amount was $250,000, right?
Correct.
Okay. So does anyone have any questions based on that? So
And I would just add,
yeah.
Mr. Chair, so then what you're seeing here on the home dollars, the reduction based on the actual amounts, the 103,000, that was the contingency that the CDCIP board recommended if there was a shortfall, that and the $11,000 on the administration.
So council, so based on that, and the information that we received from Habitat for Humanity, so that $250,000 isn't going to work. There are a couple of different things we can do. One would be to take that money and reappropriate it. And based on the time, I don't know if we can actually do that. The other thing would be to use that $250,000, figure out and have that help to supplement or not supplement, but use that amount to lessen the hurt of the percentage decrease that would be done across the board. We can't do that.
So this has to stay within that category. So
it's in the.
So
other
we would
category.
just
That's right.
we would
Okay.
just recommend putting it right back to where it came from the Home Development Fund, which are dollars that go right back out
Okay.
into the
All
community.
right, that works.
So
Okay.
just to be clear, the council's straw poll for a percentage decrease only applies to CDBG, not the other three grants.
Correct.
It will not affect any projects going below $30,000, and it will affect every single CDBG application, but it will still maximize the administration and maximize the public services categories.
Okay, thank you. And thanks for that clarification. I apologize for I have so many different numbers and things floating around in my head right now. I don't know what in the heck is up. So with that being said, we will then let's move forward with getting that information. Staff will get back to each of you before or by the formal meeting when we have this discussion. And I just want to thank want to thank David for the administration's work. I also want to thank the CDCIP board for their work in also assessing this. So,
Mr.
thank
Chair?
you. Yes.
Sorry. We're going to revisit the neighbor works discussion at some point.
I would assume. Would we do that in the formal meeting, or
Well, that's why
kind of
I'm
raised the
wondering
issue.
beforehand, because I think there are some details in there that I'm not quite sure that this proposal would handle effectively.
Okay, then
So-
let's go ahead and do that now, because I don't know how we could do it across the hall. Yeah. So who all is here from the library? Is anybody here from the library for their budget? Oh, they're outside. Oh, well, since the library was outside, then this isn't going to matter. Because of the time frame that we're working with, we're going to have to delay your presentation. I am so sorry, because I know that you have board members here. We're going to have to delay the library discussion to a future meeting. So my apologies to you, your staff, and your board. We have a packed agenda that is not speeding up. So. Okay. So we'll definitely be in touch. Thank you all.
So, would you like me to make?
Please.
Okay. Mr. Chair, regarding Neighborhood Works, I move that we allocate 50,000, well, subject to what we just discussed, an amount in or around 50,000 to be immediately available for home ownership and real estate development services, and 50,000 to be in a contingency reserve to be released to Neighborhood Works as of January 1st, 2020, if the administration confirms that Neighborhood Works has, number one, repaid the amount of federal funds due based upon the recent audit and demonstrated to the satisfaction of the city administration that any systems or personal issues have been resolved, or Neighborhood Works demonstrates that they have been subject of an independent outside audit by a recognized auditing firm to confirm the issues identified in the recent audit that have been addressed and that no new issues exist. And should the requirements not be met, the funds will lapse for reappropriation by the City Council based upon the recommendation from the City Administration based upon qualified applications as required by the federal government.
Okay. So since that,
Mr. Chair, I would like to recuse myself from this discussion and vote.
great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Since we can't make a formal motion in a work session, what I can do is take that as a motion for a straw poll.
That's what I meant.
Yep. And so now that the motion has been made, let's have that discussion.
Well, I think my question, Mr. Chair, is
Yeah.
the nature of the issue is that their business model doesn't mean they spend the money down immediately within the calendar year. Is that part of it? I mean, as far as I understand it, because previous years, it's a rotating system, and so that's one question. Does giving 50,000 with 50,000 contingency actually address that? The second question is an audit happening quick enough to actually reallocate these funds within the calendar year in any meaningful way is a question in my head. So that's where I'm sort of struggling with how does this actually rectify an issue that we're struggling with?
Okay. Councilmember Mendenhall, and then Councilmember Wharton.
Aren't they required to spend it down within a year, period,
No, but
for HUD?
I
No.
think it harms our future applications, though.
Right, so their program income does not have a time sensitivity, except for that they can't access new funding in a application cycle until their old program income is spent. So there's that. The current year application, we do one-year applications, and then we look to extenuating circumstances that may allow us to extend an application, but typically we don't do that as matter of practice.
So if I could clarify or add to what Jen said, just to put the dollar numbers to it, I believe it's about 200,000?
$280,000.
$280,000 that NeighborWorks currently has in program income fund that they would have to spend down before they can access the 50 or the 100. In addition, there's $80,000 from the previous award that contractually they have to spend down by the end of June, or that those dollars are recaptured for reallocation in a future application.
I mean, I'm supportive of NeighborWorks. I want the program to keep going. The programs. My question is, this doesn't seem to fit. I mean, our solution doesn't fit the issue, I guess.
Ben, I know that Ben had some additional or some information as well. Do you want to?
The executive director of NeighborWorks sent an email with information to the council. I think it was 2 weeks ago, and it was forwarded to you. And she clarified that, as Jen said, yes, they do need to spend their program income fund, which is the money that's repaid from the loans, and they need to spend that first before they can spend the new CDBG award dollars. But she also referenced a pipeline of projects coming up where they were expecting to spend said funds. I don't have timelines if that's within the next fiscal year, but they did have a plan to get there.
Okay, Councilmember Wharton, and then Councilmember Mendenhall.
I'd just like to point out that as part of the straw poll, it's that they only have to demonstrate to the satisfaction of the administration and the council that they've met the requirements or they perform an audit. So if we're happy with what they've done, they don't need to provide a full audit. Second of all, I don't think it prevents us from releasing the funds early if the requirements have been met or the demonstrations have been met that are satisfactory to us.
That's how I understood your motion / straw poll.
Thank you.
Councilmember Mendenhall.
I wanted to know that if these funds are allocated as the straw poll has offered, and NeighborWorks, to Councilmember Johnston's point, doesn't liquidate or doesn't zero out that program income fund account and access the 50 or the 100 eventually, does this harm Salt Lake City's future funding possibilities from HUD?
What it does is it shows that there is a lack of need within our community because funds are not being spent immediately. So when any organization that holds onto their funding for too long, it triggers another timeliness requirement that HUD watches very closely. So it just adds to that. So that, I think that would be the only thing that comes to mind.
I think we made it clear in our work sessions leading up to this work session that we really want to continue supporting NeighborWorks. We made some not comfortable pulls from other great organizations in order to get money into here. So I hope that there's no doubt in the public eye that we want to support NeighborWorks and we believe in the work that they do in the west side of our city. But I think I share some of the concerns of Councilmember Johnston and just want to make sure that we don't compromise this really tenuous funding stream anyway by trying to do something out of the goodness of our hearts. And I think they take it that way, but if it can't actually be utilized, then we don't want to compromise. So I'm curious.
Is it a loan fund, fundamentally?
They have, yes. Yes, the program income comes from a loan that's actually from many, many years ago, where they lent it out to the community and have received repayments. So they continue to utilize it for the same purpose of doing mortgages, rehab mortgages, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and so I think the home ownership thing is so fundamental to the city. I think this is important, but is this the right mechanism for that particular funding stream? Because there are certain federal requirements that we're held accountable for. So I don't have a clear understanding of how we would go a different direction to help this, but I think there's so many questions in how does this money actually do work it in the right way we want it to work there. So that was my concern about the 50 and 50
Councilmember
concept.
Mendenhall.
I want to support the motion. I want to believe in the pipeline of funding that they have coming up that they tell us they do. And I would like to ask for a meeting with NeighborWorks representatives in the coming month or so to really understand their plan and bring my concern that I don't want to compromise the integrity of our city CDBG dollars for some potential or unspent dollars in their regard. So that's where I'll be voting.
Councilmember Wharton. Councilmember Fowler. Oh. Let's turn my mic off. So the motion, the straw poll on the table, we don't need to go through that again. The way that this would work is if this passes, then it doesn't automatically become part of the ordinance. We'd still have to make the motion across the hall and vote on it, but this at least gives some intent on the direction that the council's going. So thumbs up that we support Councilmember Wharton's straw poll, thumbs down that we oppose it. Great. Okay, and that passes unanimously without, or Anna has recused herself, or Councilmember Valdemora, sorry. and Councilmember Rogers is out of town. Okay, thank you. The next item on our agenda is an item that Ben is still going to have to stay up at the table. It's for budget amendment number 5 for fiscal year 2018-2019 follow-up. Ben Ludke will lead this discussion as our council policy analyst, and Mary Beth Thompson, the city's CFO, and John Vike from the city budget director will also join us at the table.
This is the third briefing for budget amendment number 5, general fund, city side, and the council is scheduled to take action tonight. There are 2 quick updates. The first is the staff report includes a summary of the key findings from the 2006 study of Warm Springs Historic Plunge Site. The administration is requesting $37,000 to fund a study looking at the water side of the site. We've never, as a city, done a water analysis of Warm Springs before. They're also asking for funding to do a structural and engineering study. The studies would not be done concurrently, as the results of the water study would certainly have an impact on the potential and allowable uses of the site, and whatever the use is for the site will determine part of the structural and engineering study. And I don't know if Jennifer McGrath is in the room and wants to add a little more on that. I would also call the council's attention to there's a recommendations for future research on the second page of the staff report, which is taken from that 2006 study. There were a number of challenges and strengths found at the site. It's certainly a complex evaluation.
Hey, Jennifer.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
Great. Yeah, so we already have a scope of work which we've shared with council staff for the water piece, and we intend to move that forward quickly. We're continuing to work with the engineering firm to solidify a scope of work for that piece, which we're happy to share as soon as we get that, and then we'll move that forward as well. Our intention at this point is to do an update to the work that was done back in 2006, with an emphasis on the roof, because that seems to be the most immediate issue that we're concerned about. So again, as soon as we're able to nail down that scope with the engineering firm, our intention is to move that forward.
Great. Questions about this project from council? Great, thank you.
The one other update for the council is the council added item of $70,000 for the tuition reimbursement program. The council requested at the previous briefing information on employee retention and utilization. If you refer to the big screens, it shows 3 years of utilization, and I want to note that the terminated amount includes voluntary and involuntary, so it's not just people who were involuntarily let go. It also, for the current fiscal year, is through March, so there's still another quarter, and the number may increase even further, and that there is the city rate of turnover over this time was higher than the percentages shown in this graph.
Okay. So no follow-up questions, Councilmember
How
Mendenhall?
much higher? Councilmember Johnston wants to know.
So for the last 2 years, it's about 2 percentage points, and then I think it's like 1.7 percentage points. And if you go back to fiscal year 16-17, it's like 5 percentage points. Mm-hmm.
Great.
Thank you.
Any other questions on that?
That's it for the updates.
All right. So overall, do any of you have any other questions about the budget amendment at all? Okay. Thank you. The next item on our agenda is the proposed Department of Public Utilities budget for fiscal year 2019-2020. And I'm not sure who from the department is going to be here. Is David here? Okay, so I will turn the time over to somebody. Okay. Oh, Laura's coming up. Okay. So Laura Briefer is our Director of Public Utilities, and Laura, before you begin your budget proposal, if you could introduce some of the guests that you have here today.
Sure, and actually before I introduce all of my coworkers at the table, I did want to point out that we have members of our Public Utilities Advisory Committee here. Ted Wilson, right there.
If each of the advisory committee members could stand up just so we can see you. Hi, Ted.
Roger Player, Tom Godfrey, and Ted Boyer.
Great. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you. And as you know, we work with them during the development of our budget and have them recommend a budget based on that. Here at the table, we have Jesse Stewart, our Deputy Director, Lisa Tarfelli, our Finance Administrator, and Jason Brown, our Chief Engineer. So our budget proposal presentation today is made up of a couple of different parts. Just an introduction, and we wanted to talk about the budget for each separate utility: water, stormwater, streetlights, and sewer. And then there are two companion pieces to this year's budget that are also on the agenda. One is a resolution for the new water reclamation facility. This resolution is something that's required by the Utah Department of Environmental Quality as part of our variance to complete compliance by January 1st, 2025. And then the second piece is the adoption of new water and sewer rate structures. These are part of the recommendations for a comprehensive water, sewer, and stormwater rate study that was completed last year. So I don't know if we'll have time to get to all of those pieces, but we are prepared to talk about all of them. So the major focus of Public Utilities budget this year is really based on the premise of serving our community, protecting public health, and protecting the environment. And that's in a few different ways. First of all, a very major focus in all four utilities is the rehabilitation and replacement of aging infrastructure, particularly aging water infrastructure. Infrastructure failure and degradation can have a very significant impact to public health, water supplies, environment, and the local economy. Our capital asset process uses a very systematic approach that identifies and prioritizes infrastructure needs to proactively avoid these negative impacts. A second major focus is planning for both today and tomorrow's challenges. This includes water supply. We've just completed a 40-year plan, which will then move into a major water infrastructure plan for the next 40 years. We also have a water conservation master plan update, a source water protection update, particularly with our Wasatch watersheds, and we are also looking at climate vulnerability and adaptation studies. A third piece is supporting the economic growth in our communities that we serve. We are requesting budget to hire additional personnel to help with development review and inspections. There's lots of new development occurring within our service area, both in Salt Lake City and in our water service area outside of Salt Lake City. And then finally, our budget includes many items that are in response to increased and changing environmental requirements related to water quality, both on the drinking water side and the clean water side. So our total proposed budget across all four utilities is just shy of $300 million. Across our utilities, our revenues are projected to be about $249 million. We're proposing to use reserves at about $48.9 million. Some of that is a balance of a 2017 bond issue. We're also proposing water rate increases and increases in both sewer and stormwater. To give a sense of what those rate increases would do for sort of middle average residential water bills, the total for all three utilities with rate increases would be about $5.35 a month. For folks that have lower water consumption, across all of those utilities, it would be about $2.52 per month. We are proposing capital investments at $184 million. Out of our entire budget, operations comprises a little over $97 million. And then we're also proposing to bring on 17 new full-time equivalent positions to bring our staffing from 422.5 to 439.5. The next slides just show each utility budget. So starting with the water utility, we're proposing for fiscal year 2020, $129,821,000 budget. The revenues for this budget include water service fees, reserve funds, and revenue bonds. Again, we're proposing that 5% rate increase. And out of the entire budget, capital investments are at $61.7 million and operations at $66.2 million. Our capital improvement program as part of this budget has quite a few different projects, some of them long-term projects in our master plan. This would include the East-West Conveyance Project. That is a project that brings water sources from the south, that's our Cottonwood Canyons and Deer Creek Reservoir, and constructs a pipeline to bring those water sources into Salt Lake City, downtown Salt Lake City, and potentially eventually to the Northwest Quadrant. But this first phase is to accommodate growth and have some redundancy in water supplies to Salt Lake. We also are proposing some rehabilitation of our 3 water treatment plants for a total of $8 million. We are supporting the roadway bond. We have to get in ahead of the resurfacing of city roads and replace utilities. And in the water utility, that amounts to about $9.8 million. And then we're replacing water mains for a total of $23 million. We're continuing our smart meter program. This year, so far, we've replaced about 17,000 of our 90,000 meters with smart meters. That's going to have a significant impact, we think, in terms of opportunities for water conservation, opportunities for people to be able to look at their water use in real time and identify property side leaks earlier. So we're excited about that. And then I should also mention, with this 5% rate increase, with the changes to the proposed rate structure that we talked about a little bit earlier, most residents will not experience a change in their water bills. In fact, most residents will see their water bills decrease. And that's due to a structural change that goes from a from a system-wide cost of service to a class cost of service. And in the water utility, we're also, out of those 17 full-time equivalent employees, we're proposing 7.8 equivalent employees in this utility.
Okay, questions? Councilmember Wharton.
I want to ask about a specific project. Is it best for me to do that now or later?
Now.
Okay. So I know that council members have gotten some, or may have gotten some inquiries from some District 3 residents about the 4th Avenue well project. And I just want to ask some questions about that. And I know that there's quite a number of my residents here that are concerned about that. So, we had the original meeting with the community back in November. And there, we were able to subsequently meet and get an update, and you communicated to me some changes that were made as a result of feedback to the pump house. Can you tell me how is the design of the pump house has changed since that time?
Sure. So the 4th Avenue well is located on Canyon Road, and that is one of the more important drinking water wells in our system. It supplies downtown Salt Lake City and some areas of northern Salt Lake City and ranges from about 3 to 7 million gallons per day. So it's very important for the summertime water supply. We have to replace the electrical system in that well, and to replace the electrical system means that we have to bring the well up to code. It's currently not in compliance with Division of Drinking Water and other regulatory requirements. To bring the well to the surface means we have to construct a well house around it and do some things that make sure that it's in compliance with Division of Drinking Water regulations. We actually started this process in 2017 and started working with the community early on, and so we delayed. We were budgeted for this project last fall. We can only do the construction in the fall time period because that well has to operate during the summer. So we delayed construction for a year after we had pretty significant community feedback. The well house has an impact to a local community, and we understand that. So since then, we have been working with some architects from CRSA and with two engineering firms so that we can ensure that we have proper engineering and that we're able to take community feedback on the architecture of the well house. And also the community asked us to look at other alternatives, such as can we move the well to a different location? What would be the cost of that? Can we keep it underground? And so we actually recently prepared a report that shows all of those different alternatives and their costs and their risks and their benefits. Jesse could probably summarize the architectural work as well.
Well, tell me more about, because I know, we went through the first round of the pump house. So tell me about what changes have happened since that time.
I can take that. So initially, again, like Laura said, we've been planning this project for quite some time. So initially, it started out as an electrical upgrade. Once we started looking at the electrical, we realized that there were other things we needed to do to bring it to code, which means touching it all the way, bringing it above ground. Sorry, get this a little closer. Okay, sorry. So again, once we decided to address the electrical, we realized we needed to address all the different codes, electrical codes, drinking water codes, and make it into a larger project than just an electrical project. That requires bringing it above ground. That's going to require building a pump house. Initially, we wanted to have, because again, as Laura mentioned, this is such a critical well for us, we were going to have an on-site emergency generator. We've revisited that. We're not going to have that. We're still going to purchase a generator, but it'll be a skid-mounted generator that we'll be able to haul in during emergencies. We also were going to fluoridate the well. We're mandated by the county and the state to fluoridate our water. Reassessing that, we looked at the natural fluoride and how our system works, and we feel confident at this point that we don't need to fluoridate that, so fluoride is now off the table. But then chlorination is another one that's going to be on there. So we do want to chlorinate the well because it does service such a large area for such a large portion of the time. Downtown Salt Lake gets about 80 to 100% of its water from that well in the summertime. And chlorination, again, the water from the well is actually very good water. You can drink it straight up. But if you're the 12,000th connection, or you're in a high-rise building, I would like to have chlorine. We want to have chlorine residual within our system to keep the system as pure as possible.
Okay. So, sure.
Go ahead,
To
Councilmember
follow up on
Mendenhall.
the chlorination, is this the only place in the system where that chlorination can enter this particular stream of water?
So a lot of our waters are blended. Again, we've got sources from Little Cottonwood Creek, Big Cottonwoods, Parleys, and City Creek are our big water treatment plants. Plus, we get water from the Jordan Valley system that comes into the west side and kind of wraps around. We've also got 26 wells that we use periodically depending on supply and demand. All of those aren't chlorinated right now, but we have plans to do that in the future as we move forward. Again, this is such a big producer, and it services those 12,000 connections for 6 months of the year. That might be their primary water. That's the driver for chlorination.
Let me try asking it in a different way. Is there another point in the trunk of that particular, from the well to all those customers downtown, that the chlorination could enter into it that isn't in this pump house?
So that's one thing we've looked at we had Hansen and Luce engineers do an assessment of various options. Dr. David Hansen did the assessment, and he looked at everything from no change right now and what are the pros and cons of that, to lining the well, which we'd want to do if we touch the well, put a new liner in there to give it another 100 years of life. Building the well house with chlorination on site, building the well house but doing chlorination someplace else in the area, moving the well within 300 feet, which wouldn't cause a water right change application, or moving the well someplace else. All of those have pros and cons, and they're listed out in the memorandum, which I'm happy to leave a copy with you or send a copy
But
to.
I think that the answer to that question is we did look at it, and there are risks to doing that and significant cost. If we were to put chlorine in one place, we'd have to build a new distribution line to bring it to an appropriate area of the city, and there are risks in transporting that chemical, undiluted chemical, through that line. And I mean,
And one thing with the chlorine,
it's not something we would prefer to do, but it is something we've looked at.
and it's a sodium hypochlorite liquid solution. It's similar to a kind of a double strength Clorox bleach that you'd use in your home. So it's not gaseous chlorine or anything like that. Just
Okay,
to clarify, I know there's
but-
been some confusion on that.
So if it's dangerous to, I think okay, let me back up a little bit before I get into the chloride. How have the changes to the well house that have happened in the last couple months, and as a result of the Hansen report, how have those been communicated to the public aside from the presentation today?
We've had multiple, again, I can pull up the timeline, but we started a public outreach about a year ago. We've gone to
the changes.
the changes.
The changes from the last couple months. How have those been communicated?
So we have answered some individual constituent questions, but we're planning to do an open house on May 9th to, I think, communicate a lot of these changes. It's taken us some time to get the feasibility analysis completed and some of the architectural options incorporated. So I think we've got...
Has notice gone out for that open house yet?
We're planning to put that out shortly.
Okay.
Yes.
And how will that be communicated?
The notice for public health. So our public engagement manager, I believe, is still here. Holly, the question is, how are we going to communicate the public outreach for the May 9th meeting? So if you could, yeah. Thanks.
Thank you, members of the council. We'll be doing what we typically do, but in this case, with social media, with flyers, with our website, which has been updated regularly. I hope you've all had an opportunity to check that out. The 4th Avenue website is regularly updated, and a lot of questions answered frequently. And myself, and the project engineer, plan on actually taking the flyers house by house in the area, especially in the neighborhood where people have been most affected.
Okay, and I received a copy of the Hansen report today. Has that been made public, and has that been distributed to people that have requested it leading up to this?
Yes, it was
Okay.
the entire report was put on our website, on the 4th Avenue site, the day that we got it.
Okay. Okay. So I think what I'm hearing from with a lot of residents is also concerned about, I think people might disagree about when outreach started, or versus when you planned to roll it out, or when you started working internally versus when they received the message. And I think my concern too is that from the time that we had the November meeting until now, that we talked about sort of resetting and trying to restart the project and get more input. So I just want to make sure that the plan is still to do that, because I think a lot of residents are concerned about the lack of about the time that's passed, and then that we haven't done anything yet. So
I did want to correct one thing from earlier. We did go back to the public in January.
Okay.
And that was at a Greater Avenues Community Council meeting.
Oh, that's right, yes.
And then from February through March was when we had to do all of the engineering work, so the well inspection. We did have some interaction with the community during that time as well. Just people were concerned about what was going on, so we answered individual questions. And then, of course, we met with you in April to give you an update as well. And then on April 12th was when we completed our feasibility analysis. So we're trying to move this along, and we are ready to talk about the feasibility analysis and about all the work we've done in terms of different options on the whole project, including architecture.
Okay. So what, let's see, with the chemicals, I want to go back to that really quickly. The chlorine, it sounds like it would be, there are risks about chlorinating it later down the pipe. So why should people not be concerned that the chlorination is happening at the well if chlorinating further down the pipe could present risks?
Right. Well, I think, at the well house, the chlorine is secured and monitored by us. If we had to pipe it, I think some of the risks would be the pipeline breaks, right?
Part of this is if we have it right at the site, again, as Laura mentioned, it's in the secure facility. It'll be double wall containment, so it'll have its own built-in safeguards. But also, it's right there for our operators when they're adjusting flows. The dosing is right there. It's not distal or distant from it someplace. Instead of having two sites, which we'd have to do a chlorination site someplace else, it would cause a footprint someplace. We'd still have a well house. It would be two different places that our operators are going to try to regulate flow and regulate chlorination.
Okay, and sorry, everybody, one last question. Sorry. So if money weren't a factor, which it obviously is a huge factor, but if it weren't, what other factors or obstacles would you need to consider for moving the pipe or the pump house?
So part of that is in Dr. Hansen's report also with some of the pros and cons. So right now we've got a known entity. We've got a known quantity of 3, like Laura said, 3 is about as low as we pump it, up to 7 million gallons a day. There's no guarantee if we move that well someplace else, we'll get that same production. So that's one of the cons of moving the well someplace else, is giving up a water resource that is known, that's plumbed into our system now. If we move that someplace else, we've got to plumb it into our system. Hopefully it's where we need it. Right now it's where our system is designed for. So again, it's both operational, would we be able to find the same water? Would we be able to get a water right if we moved it more than 300 feet away? If we moved it within 300 feet away, we'd probably have to take 2 homes and demolish them based on Dr. Hansen's evaluation, just to have room to get the rigs in there to drill the well. Then we'd still have a well house and pump house with a chlorination facility.
And the loss of potentially 2 historic homes. Okay. So I just want to, well, I appreciate all that information. I think that the residents that are here appreciate any information, and I'll be really excited to see when you start advertising this open house. I want to be there, and I think people would want to have as much notice as possible because they're eager to be heard again. So thanks for informing me about that.
So before I go to other questions, I do want to, first off, I need to step out. I have a prior commitment, so I'm turning the chair over to Councilmember Fowler, who will chair the remainder of the meeting. But I wanted to take this opportunity to thank Laura and your team with Public Utilities. I've said this before, while people can go back throughout history and pick apart what Salt Lake City has done and decisions that we've made, the one thing that Salt Lake City has been consistent with is the managing of our watershed and the delivery of our water to the city. And you have, taken over a very historic program. You've operated it well. Your predecessors have operated it well. So I just want to thank you for that work and for making all of us in the city look good, because you do have a very, very tough job. It's not just residents of Salt Lake City that Public Utilities is providing water to. They're providing water to most of the East Bench of Salt Lake County, as well as Salt Lake City, and you manage our Wasatch Canyons and do it well. So I just want to thank you all for that as I step out. Yes.
Thank you.
I have a question. Sounds good. Just a question for clarification. You said residents will see a bill increase of about $5.36 per month. And when does it start?
It would start July 1st, if the consolidated fee schedule is adopted. Yes, this fiscal year.
July 1st. But then you've mentioned something about a decrease, and I didn't understand that part.
Yeah, so with rate structure changes in the water rates, we went through a very long process to do a rate study to identify the cost of service to provide water service. And we convened a 30-something person rate advisory committee made up of representatives around the city and in the county. And what our rate advisory committee settled on were a few main goals, but one of them was a fairness goal and one was an equity goal. And to meet those goals, they recommended we change from a system-wide cost of service rate, which means every customer, residents, commercial and industrial, all pay the same unit rate for water. So it's all the same per gallon. The Rate Advisory Committee realized after some evaluation that the cost of service burden was higher on commercial, industrial, and institutional customers than it was on residential customers. And so they recommended going with a class cost of service, which means that these different classes of ratepayers will pay a different amount commensurate with the cost of service. And so what that means for our residential ratepayers is that their costs actually go down, even though we're projecting an overall 5% rate increase for revenue purposes. The residents will pay a lower amount. However, that's offset by higher amounts that will be paid by commercial and industrial ratepayers.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Councilmember Mendenhall?
Thank you. I want to jump back to the pump house conversation. And I've looked through the report on the website, and I'm curious about whether or not you can answer this now. I'm not sure. Other pump house construction projects that have taken place in the last 10 years or so, or any that you have in the pipeline. So many puns, I'm sorry. So that we can have an idea of, I'm looking at the percentage differences, and also that there's some, my understanding that there's some architectural investments that weren't standard that have been included now in this project. So I would just like, as a different council district, and for the other council members to understand, if when there's a pump house project in one of our districts, are we going to be able to expect that increased cost of a more beautiful building and the architectural investments that Public Utilities has made? Because if this is an increase from what you would do in a standard format, then my residents want that increase also. And I would also like to know if you can provide us with a map of pump houses that are in residential areas, and then if it's possible for us to see photos of those pump houses, I think that would help us to contextualize this discussion.
May I jump in right now? And so Charlie's not here, so I'm going to make decisions for him, because why not? So maybe with what Councilmember Mendenhall said and some of the concerns, and just sort of how we are far behind right now, and there's other budget discussions that I think we need to have. If we could ask our staff to follow up with Public Utilities to ask for those requests, and maybe also just reach out to Charlie and James and see if this is something that perhaps in the future we can put on a future budget, just so we can learn a little bit more about it. I know this is an issue that came up recently for us, and I don't even know that I've read the email on it already, right? Because we've been in meetings all day today. But maybe it's something that we can just talk to Chair, Vice Chair about, and it may be something we can learn a little bit more about in a future agenda. And even if it's not on an agenda item, just getting some of that information that Councilmember Mendenhall mentioned, and maybe some of the questions that Councilmember Wharton mentioned as well might be helpful, not only for Councilmember Wharton's district, but as Aaron mentioned, for all of our districts, and just kind of future knowledge. So maybe we can do that. And then if there's nothing further on the pump house, if there's other questions on the particular budget, I have a question, unless somebody else wants to go. And it has to do with the policy questions. And I know we're running sort of out of time. So I'm going to ask also, before I ask this question, my council members, if it's okay if we kind of push through to 6:30-ish at least, and try to get through as much of our agenda as we can. We did pull the library, but kind of keep pushing. So I hope that's okay with everyone. My question is, and I don't know if you've received our staff briefing and the policy questions, but it does have to do with our impact fees, and how those are being collected and applied. I still am learning. I've been on the council for a year now, and impact fees are still confusing to everyone. I think we finally have Ben as somewhat of our resident impact fee expert, but maybe you could, I'm interested in how we're doing this, how we're implementing it. If there is, and this might be for mayor staff, my understanding is that we're looking at a new impact fee facilities report, and what the impact of that may be, and kind of, are we sort of streamlining the process to make sure that we're using those impact fees where they need to go and how they need to get there? That's a really compound sentence, and I would be objected to in court, but yeah, I hope you get my drift.
Well, we have our new finance administrator here, Lisa Tarfelli, and she's done some research on this question. We did review the staff report, but I'll answer one of the questions on the impact fee facilities plan and analysis. As part of our rate study last year, we did prepare a new impact fee facilities plan, but the rate of growth in our service area has been so fast that we are going to update that a little bit, because I don't think it includes all of the facilities that we need to include. And so we'll be doing that this summer and bringing that back to you with a new impact fee analysis. But it does show the impact fees would go up even with the one that we prepared last year.
Okay. So. Does that include any of the Northwest Quadrant Inland Port area that we are anticipating servicing?
It does. With the Northwest Quadrant and Inland Port area, development does pay for development, so we are not paying for betterments for the development community on that. There are some master planned projects that provide downstream capacity, for instance, in the sewer system, and those were part of our impact fee analysis. So one thing that we are going to look at a little bit more closely is the new water reclamation facility. We were under the impression that that wouldn't qualify as a growth-related project because the primary driver of that project is regulatory. However, it does accommodate future growth. It doesn't increase in capacity, but it is something that benefits future growth. So we are going to relook at that too, and sort of the philosophy behind that.
Oh, that would be nice. Okay.
Councilors, I would just like to add that, as Laura has indicated, I believe that it would be interesting for us to look at the wastewater facility, because when we think about this capacity, it's not only new capacity, but if we have available capacity within our existing systems that would push us to, say, our 90 or 100% limit, we need to assess fees to address that capacity. So we're kind of like selling that excess capacity through this process.
And sorry, I'm going to interrupt real quick.
Mhm.
Were we doing that before, or is this sort of a new, as you sort of mentioned, maybe a new philosophy as it is with the water reclamation plan?
I think we assumed that the water reclamation facility wouldn't be eligible for that because it's not increasing in capacity. It's still going to be a 56 million gallon per day plant, and the need to build a new plant really was driven by nutrient requirements, new Clean Water Act requirements. And so, but I think it's worth it for us to take another look at that.
Right, and that is correct. And even in the draft facilities plan that was prepared, that we're now currently updating, there are specific components within the construction of the new wastewater facility that were identified. So if you have the opportunity to look at the proposed budget and you look through all those sheets, there's little purple highlighted items in those capital plans, and those are the ones that were specifically called out in prior assessments. As Laura mentioned, that list will be updated since we have so many new things coming to see what is determined. So there is existing list in water, sewer, and there are actually a couple of stormwater items that are eligible. So also contained in the information that you were provided through your council staffing report, there was a small recap of where we were at as of our audited fees at June 30th of 2018. Of course, that will be updated. As you can see, we do a great job of reinvesting those sewer impact fees every year, but I'm very confident that with our large water projects, that we are spending those down appropriately as they have been assessed, so there's no worry that we're collecting something and not utilizing it.
Are there other questions for public utilities on sort of the budget itself right now? This is the first time we're looking at it. I feel like last year we saw you about 82 times, which I appreciate and enjoy.
Will we have another crack at this one?
As long as they're willing to come back. They usually are.
Yes.
If there is nothing further right now, Erin, you look a little pensive, so I don't want to move on if...
I know we're short on time, and I also know that Public Utilities is always willing to have conversations with us, so I don't feel like this is our only chance at this.
Okay, perfect. I think unless, Laura, you want to, if there's other things, I know we didn't quite get through your whole budget, but I think the sort of bullet points will help, and I do know you're always available for our questions, but if there's something else you want to wrap up with, we'll give you that moment.
No, I think we can address the rest at another time, and yes, we are open to any additional questions. When we see you next, we would like to go a little bit more in depth into our sewer utility, stormwater utility, and street lighting budgets, and then we have prepared a lot of information related to what the rates would be under this new rate structure with these proposed overall rate increases, because it's not necessarily well, it's just a little complex to be doing both at the same time, so.
Okay, and I think we can maybe point that out to Charlie and James next time for a future agenda when maybe we can ask you back to concentrate just on sort of the complexities of some of those things.
For one thing.
Thank you.
I want to thank you for always including the comparable rates to other cities in the state and other states in the region. I think that in my experience as a council member going to community council meetings and answering questions about rate increases, that you have done a good job of articulating the really the federal requirements that we're working to update our system to, the historic nature of the rest of the system that needs updating, and then helping us to contextualize it is really critical. So thank you for continuing to supply that, and I hope that you keep up with that for us. It helps us tell the story.
We will. We will. All righty. Next on our agenda is our Department of Airports budget. So if we can have all of the peeps that are going to teach us about the airport budget at the table. Bill, how are you? And
Brian Butler.
Brian?
Brian
Nice.
is our acting CFO.
Excellent. Well, welcome. And 1, 2, 3, 4. Luckily, I still have a quorum in the room. It's getting down to the bare minimum, but why don't we just get started?
Great.
It's all you.
We'll
It's all
be
you, Boo.
as efficient as we can possibly be. I'll just make a couple of introductory comments and then turn this over to Brian for a more detailed presentation. But I think what you're going to see is a budget that reflects two basic dynamics that are occurring. One is next year, the first phase of the airport redevelopment concludes and we open. And so the budget increases that you'll see are in many cases driven by that. We're buying equipment and we're hiring people that will be needed to operate phase one of the new airport. Even though phase one doesn't actually open until September 15th, we can't wait until that date to begin hiring and to acquire the equipment. So it's kind of an exciting moment. You will notice that in the budget that we have presented, there's not a penny allocated for capital improvements to our existing facilities. That's the first time in the history of the airport when that's been the case. And just kind of a moment to take a deep breath and realize the scale of what you all have supported and endorsed. The second item that I think you'll begin to see in our budget is just a reflection of part of what you were just talking about here, and that is the economy is booming. That's good. It's created tremendous competition for labor, and so that's reflected in a number of ways. I think the single largest increase in our operating budget is for janitorial services. A little bit of that is related to the new SLC, which is just that much bigger, but a lot of it is we're having to pay our contractor more in order to retain labor. They, at one point, were experiencing 100% monthly turnover. That really doesn't provide the kind of service that we want at the airport, and so we are proposing a fairly substantial increase to accommodate that, because Salt Lake, even though it's an old facility, it has a reputation for being very well cared for, and we want to continue that. Oh, okay, great. So let me introduce Brian, who will go through the budget, and obviously any point along the way, if you have any questions or issues related to the budget or anything else, we're happy to take a crack at it.
Great. Thank you.
Walk right into it. There you go.
Thanks, Bill. Bill's been really hands-on in this budget, and he's probably heard this presentation 4 or 5 times, so he could probably give this presentation if I were not here. But we're just going to go over the highlights so you guys are aware of what we're doing. The first slide, it's really just the goals we have. It's the same as that we've come with in the previous years. You know, we're getting ready to open the new facility. We're trying to manage that project, you know, control cost. At the same time, we're trying to develop IT, the latest and greatest technologies that are going to go into that. But at the same time, as we open the new airport, we're going to be still operating out of the old facilities to maintain the gates. So there are a lot of complexities when you open a new facility and then you start demolition on the garage and the other facilities. It does come with challenges. And then the last bullet point is just increased airline activity. This next slide is going to show over the past 5 years, the airport's been averaging over 1 million passengers more year over year. We're averaging around 5.5% to 6% growth, which is just unprecedented for the airport, which is a good challenge to have, but at the same time, it puts a big strain on our operating budget. And so as we continue to grow with passengers, we do see increases just naturally through our operating budget. This next slide is really just to kind of show you the breakdown of, with the increase in passengers, where is the revenue coming from? The way the airport's set up is it's almost like a cost recovery for the airport when it comes to the airlines. as our operating expense goes up, it costs more for the airlines to land their planes. It costs them more to rent the ticket counter. And so while we see, million more passengers year over year, our costs have not been increasing at that same rate. And so you see a very moderate increase in airline revenues. But what you do see in this slide is all those passengers going into the terminals. They're buying more concessions, they're renting more cars, they're parking more. And so you see a much steeper slope to our non-airline revenues as we continue to see this passenger growth through SLC. When it comes to the airport, our benchmark is called cost per enplaned passenger. This is what the airlines kind of hold us accountable to. This kind of gives you an idea of where we have been historically. For fiscal year 19, we budgeted $4.05. Our forecast is we're going to come in at $3.83 just because the denominator with the passengers is a lot higher.
Can I just make a point here too? So in 2024, you see that it goes up to $12.66. That's based on the same employment forecasts that we've been using, which have been really conservative. That's point one. Secondly, by 2024, that will continue to be one of the lowest cost per employments of any major airport in the United States, many of whom are already in the high teens or low 20s. So we'll have a brand new $4 billion airport and one of the lowest costs for operation in the country, which is one of the reasons why Delta keeps banging us on schedule, schedule. They want to get in there and start operating because they think it's going to be so competitive.
Yeah, and the only other thing I would add on this is the big increase that you see, the big jumps are when we actually open the different phases, and that's when our debt service through our bonds come online. And so that's not just an increase in our operating expense, but a lot of that is your debt service that you're going to see. And as Bill mentioned, kind of here's where Salt Lake compares. In fiscal year 18, our audited results were $3.83. We're projecting for this budget to be at $4.53. In comparison, for 2017 numbers, there is a delay in getting these benchmark numbers from other airports. But you'll see like Minneapolis, they're fairly similar to Salt Lake in that they're a major Delta hub. They're almost twice as much. You got Phoenix, Seattle, Las Vegas. So we continue to be one of the lowest cost per enplaned passengers across the country. This slide's really busy. All this really is kind of giving you is a high-level overview of, what were our actual fiscal year 18 results as far as revenues and expenses, as well as where we're forecasting the current year to be, and then what we're budgeting. The only thing I will point out here is you will notice we have bond issuance costs of $3.5 million. As we get ready to open this new facility, we will anticipate going out to the bond market in the first quarter of 2020. So we do have that programmed in. And you'll notice the interest expense, it continues to grow just as the more debt we issue. So we've got several slides on different revenue categories. This first one, it's to show you that even though we're an airport, only 38% of our revenues come through airlines. The vast majority, landside concessions is parking, it's the car rentals. The terminal concessions are your retail and your food and beverage. And then we have several leases. We have hangars out in the general aviation community. But this next slide is to kind of just break down the airline revenues. You'll see that airline revenues are increasing. That's a direct impact of the increased costs that we'll be budgeting for fiscal year 20. As Bill mentioned, we continue to have just this amazing growth. But when it comes to the budget season, we do rely on the airlines to tell us what they anticipate coming in. It's very, very conservative. As you'll notice, for fiscal year 20, they're telling us they're going to do 12.6 million in plane passengers. We're already forecasting for fiscal year 19, 13.1. And every conversation we have with them, all airlines, not just Delta, tell us to expect, anywhere from 5 to 6% growth, even though they don't get reflected in the numbers here. This is our concession revenue. The one thing I will point out here is in our parking. If you come out to the airport on a Tuesday or Wednesday, you'll often see that we close our parking garage. It's a supply and demand, and right now the business travelers are willing to pay that parking fee. And as such, it's been over 4 years since we've adjusted any of our rates for the parking garage and over 7 years since we've adjusted our parking rates For our surface lots, we are going to be proposing through the consolidated fee schedule a 10% increase across the board. So it'd go from $9 a day to $10 a day for the surface lot. $32 would go to $35, and then the premium, the front row parking would go from $50 to $55. A lot of this is, just like our janitorial, our shuttle drivers, one of the biggest complaints we get at the airport is, it takes too long to get a shuttle, from long-term parking to the terminals. And so we've made some investments in the salaries for our shuttle drivers, as well as we've also invested in technology to put real-time GPS tracking on the shuttles so they can, dispatch those shuttles in a much more timely and efficient manner. And then that gets us to our operating expenses. This pie chart just kind of gives you the different categories. This is historically very similar. The only difference you'll see here is historically salaries and benefits are around 50% of our budget. With the airport police joining Salt Lake City Police Department, we're just simply transferring, it's about $8 million, which represents about 8% from salaries and benefits over to the intergovernmental charges. Otherwise, we don't see any increased expenses in one category more than another.
Will that be true as the new terminals come online, or are we going to expect a huge increase to maintain like the terminals, for different maintenance? It's back to maintenance. That's the theme of the day.
So,
and really put
in this year's budget, in this proposed budget, we've actually included a fairly significant number of new employees, most of whom we're proposing in the budget to be hired somewhere in the last month or two of the fiscal year. So the positions are reflected there, and I would not expect to see a significant increase in new positions in the following year's budget, 2020. But the dollar amount will change because then we'll be budgeting for a full fiscal year. And we did this for a couple of reasons. One, we can't wait until the beginning of the next fiscal year to start hiring. It's, for equipment operators, electricians, it's a 6-month slog to find labor today. That's one issue. And the other is we want the airlines to be able to see the ramp where expenses are headed as early as possible. And I think this allows that to occur. So the dollar amount will increase, but the number of people shouldn't increase significantly. But the other truth is we're going to learn a lot in the first few months of operation because while I expect it to go perfectly, we'll be learning a lot along the way as well.
Okay, so and with these increased costs for employees, some of the airlines' fees and taxes, that will help offset that too, right? We don't have to just...
Correct. Anyone that works out on the airfield gets charged to a landing fee. Anyone that works in the terminal gets charged to a terminal. So,
but we can use some of that to pay for that. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. So the other thing that will happen, though, and I think this is a positive development, because the facility is so much larger, food and beverage concessions, I think we're going to see significant jumps there. We're going from a 1,700 car parking garage, which fills twice a week, to a 3,600 car parking garage. And so the non-aeronautical revenues are going to increase pretty substantially. And we're going to continue to see increased passenger volume. And so all of that helps generate the resources necessary to pay for this.
Thank you.
I have a question on salaries, and I can't recall from the CCAC. Does the CCAC analyze airport staff pay?
I'm not familiar with what that is.
They do?
Okay.
I guess I wondered because to hear of such a turnover rate in a particular job category.
We're not alone. I mean, I think everybody is facing this to some extent.
Okay.
We did actually work very closely with HR on our electricians. So this is a unique challenge because in a way, we're killing ourselves. They can walk across the street and go to work for one of the contractors at the airport and make $10 an hour more. Now, on the other side of that, at the end of their new employer's contract, you know, they got to hope that there's another job out there somewhere. If they stay working for us, it's a permanent job, and so on and so forth. So we were able to work with some incentives and hiring bonuses and so forth, and it's better. It's just very, for the trades in particular, it's difficult for everybody. I would say it's when I'm out about in the community, it's the number one complaint I get. We're ruining the market for trade contractors in the valley because the project is just so mammoth.
Thanks.
Okay, and so this one, the only thing I'd point here is we did not take police's salaries out of here so we could have an apples to apples comparison. So you could see the true budget impact. We are proposing 60 new full-time equivalents that will be staggered into this coming year. It started out at 104, but we did reduce it down considerably. But we do have increased expenses with our contracted janitorial shuttle drivers, as well as, you know, we had a really bad snow season. We try to take an average. We try not to overreact with any one snow year, but we do have increases there. And then just to wrap it up, we have some capital equipment requests. Some of the bigger items is we always order new shuttle buses. We always have 3 on order every year. We are going to be buying a new fire truck for the fire department. And then, as Bill mentioned, there's a lot of equipment that's going to be required for this new facility. It's just in the current facility, Bill's famous for saying you can get to anything with a step ladder. In the new facility, we're going to need a 180-foot aerial lift truck to kind of replace lights and everything. So a lot of the equipment, you know, $3.6 million is new. The other $3.8 million is just replacement of our existing fleet. And then the capital improvement, as Bill mentioned, we don't have anything budgeted in our terminals, but we do have different projects going on in the airfield, auxiliary airports. Real quick, on the airfield, we're going to do some taxiway pavement rehabilitation, some lighting projects. We're going to relocate some security gates. As far as the auxiliary airports, we do have some budget for the Tooele Valley water and sewer improvements, as well as some hangars out at the West Jordan Airport. As far as the landside projects we have several different parking lots that we are going to be doing. And lastly, the TRP and the NCP, what we're requesting the council to approve is just the remaining amount that has not been approved through City Council for the projects. What this allows us to do is it allows us to enter into contracts in the coming year for phase 2 of the project as we try to kind of tie down those contractually guaranteed maximum prices for phase 2. So with that, happy to answer any questions you guys may have.
Are there any questions from council members? Okay, I just want to, Andrew, did you? Yeah. I just wanted to say, again, Bill, this is an amazing project. I was recently in Seattle with a few council members from, I know, one of your old stomping grounds, from some council members from throughout the country, and they were bragging about how they were the best run airport, and I was like, oh, please. We actually are building our own airport. So I brag about it as often as I can, which is often, and it's an awesome project. I can't wait for it. Thanks for all of your hard work and diligence in this, and don't forget to let me know about the parking garage.
Waiver agreement, yeah.
Okay, is there anything else from anyone? Great. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for your continued support. We really appreciate it.
You make it easy, Bill. All right. We have a couple of board appointments I'd like to get to. I know next on our, I'm sorry, Ben, I just want to say I apologize for making you wait some more. But our board appointments are scheduled at 6:15. We try to do those as on time as possible. So I'm going to skip on over to our board appointments. And if I can get Kanika Welch to come on up to the table and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're interested in being on the Arts Council Board.
Hello, I'm Kanika. I am a native of Mississippi. Recently relocated to Salt Lake in November. And I was very excited when I saw the board openings because I was thinking how can I get connected to the community in Salt Lake in the most meaningful way. I'm also a published author and a former thespian. So Arts Council is kind of right up my alley. I really enjoy, well, I know for me personally, the arts have been an integral part of my life, and any opportunity that I have to share arts with other people, I try to take that.
Which district will you be representing?
I just moved here, so I'm
Where
not
do you
sure
live?
my district number. I live off Foothill Drive, Foothill on Sunnyside.
District 6. That's Charlie's district.
Okay.
So, he's not here, so thank you. I don't know if any of our board council members want to say anything.
Thank you so much for serving. I think it's very important that young people and diverse people, stay tuned with the city and serving boards and, and really get involved in this, civic service. It's one of the things why I serve here. So thank you for joining us.
Yeah, I also wanted to thank you for being a recent resident to Salt Lake and not wasting any time jumping right in. I love that, and I'm excited to see what perspective and what talents you'll bring to our city. So thank you.
Yeah.
I'm going to steal Erin's line that she usually says right now, but it's one of doing board appointments and being able to just be happy that people are engaging in our city is one of the feel-good parts of this job, which on days where we have heavy agendas, there's not a lot of feel-good parts. So thank you for allowing us to feel good. And we'll do the formal board appointment in our consent agenda tonight at our formal meeting.
Okay.
You don't have to stay for that. It's kind of at the end of the meeting, and we consent to put you on the board. So thank you for meeting with us today, and thank you for taking this opportunity.
No problem. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next, we'll have Larry Cohen, who also is going to be a part of our Arts Council board. If Larry, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, that'd be great.
Sure. Like Kamika, I'm relatively new, but I've been here about 4-5 years. I live over in Rose Park, so I'm District 1. And, I went to school for art. I have been an artist all my life. I'm also involved in the Downtown Artist Collective. I'm a member of that gallery. And I'm the design director for YESCO. So I want to bring a little bit of my knowledge. I'm very aware of permits, easements, and all those kind of things. So maybe I can bring some of that knowledge in for public art or for festivals. Want to get more involved. Again, like we chose Rose Park to kind of move to a nice integrated neighborhood that, involved with that rather than, some of the other neighborhoods. Also, it's fairly affordable these days. I just wanted to be involved, and so, that's it. I have a history of it. I'm originally from New York. I know you can't tell. And I worked for a nonprofit in Coney Island for 10 years, volunteering there. It's the last 10-in-1 circus sideshow. And I helped with the Mermaid Parade, if anybody's ever heard of that. I did marshaling and setting that up for about 10 years. So I like to be involved. So thanks.
You, council members?
Thank you
Yeah.
so much.
So much again
you.
for serving, and
Sure.
I really value all these these diverse backgrounds. I mean, it really adds up. Like, it's really, really good. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And as I mentioned to Kamika, we will do our formal consent agenda in the formal meeting. You certainly don't have to stay for it. You're more than welcome to. It is a public meeting, but you don't have to. And thank you again for your service. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, last but certainly not least, I would like to invite Ben Bolte and John Larson up to discuss the Green Bike Bike Share Program.
Hello. No, I was a poli-sci major. This is fun. So I just wanted to give everybody an update on what's going on with Green Bike, and we'll cover a few things real quick. I know it's been a long day, but we're going to do our recent stats, partnerships, affordable housing, equity connections, our upcoming Green Bike products, and new expansions. We recently had a very big milestone. This is the start of our 7th year with bikes on the ground, and all the original bikes are still here. And then we went to the community and our board members and we said, what are the words and the themes that Green Bike means to you? And a few key things kept popping up. Active transportation, transit connections, quality, affordable, safety, and community. And so we're going to make sure that these things are the key points that really stand by the organization as we grow and try some new things. We are averaging about 2 rides on every bicycle every day for the last 6+ years. We sold more passes in 2018 than we did in 2017. And to put that in perspective, when the Dockless products launched in summer of last year, our trajectory was about 10% higher than it was the previous year, and we expected that to kind of stay through for both sales and ridership. We ended the year with we were about 2 or 3% higher in sales than we were the previous year, and we were about the exact same with ridership. So we estimate that it's essentially a 10% bite out of the Green Bike pie. 65% of our rides come from annual users, and less than 1% have ever rated our maintenance as poor out of about 3,000 people that we've surveyed over the last 5-6 years, and all of those are available on our website. We think that partnerships really are the cornerstone of a nonprofit, particularly a local one. So we try and get creative. We've done the Ditch Your Car Challenge with Lyft. We'll be doing that again this year. Anybody that gets a Hive Pass now, you get free Green Bike with that. So the Hive Pass RFID card now comes with a Green Bike RFID sticker on the back that allows you to check out a bike, get on a bus or rail without having to pay any more for it. We have a community bike, so it's one bike in the system that is branded uniquely by a local nonprofit, and then every time that bike is ridden, we give $1 to that organization. The first 2 years, it was the Make-A-Wish bike, then it's been the UMOCA bike, the Utah Museum of Contemporary Art bike, and then upcoming, it's going to be the Craft Lake City bike. We're going to have an event in May called the Basket Bolt. It's going to be a station-to-station scavenger hunt. We're doing it with Salt Lake City. So participants fill Green Bike baskets with hygiene products and clothing for the VOA's Youth Resource Center. And the whole idea is really just to promote the Resource Center and Salt Lake City's infrastructure.
Ben, I'm going to interrupt you. Cindy, is it against the open meetings law if we have a city council team for this competition? Because I think we should.
I think it counts as a social function, and we can clear it with the attorney's office, but if we have to, we can agenda it.
It's challenge on, kids.
Yeah.
We're all doing this.
I approve, but my vote doesn't matter. Other partnerships, we've signed a 5-year agreement with the LDS Church. We're going to have stations on North Temple and Main Street, as well as North Temple and 2nd West. We're going to be providing transportation for the roughly 4,000 people that work in those office towers that already have a higher than usual transit utilization. And then in the past 18 months, we've seen a much larger level of interest from private developers than we previously have. I think there's a need, or at least a demand, for a permanent piece of infrastructure. And then a lot of them seem to have an interest in controlling kind of the aesthetic of their new development. So we have multiple 5-year agreements with CW Urban coming up over the next few years, multiple agreements with Clearwater Homes, PG development we just did with the Milagro and AC Hotel that's on 2nd South, Ribbon Properties, and some others. But really the focal point of the organization for the next few years is going to be affordable housing. Essentially, the data for Utah shows that 20 to 30% of Utah's household budget is going towards transportation. And for low-income families, that's actually closer to 40%. Now, we can't really control the cost of housing, but we think as a nonprofit, we can step in and help lower the transportation costs. So between that and the fact that I feel like 3-4 months, you're seeing an article in the paper that says Utahns are really 1 month away from not being able to afford their rent or their mortgage, we see this as a fairly important priority. We have Bridges Project and Rubber Company. Those are art space developments that already have stations. Solar Gardens will get one later this year, and everybody in there will have free transportation. Give Communities and EcoBox, those are 100% affordable housing. Art Space is 35 to 55% of area median income. And then we're also putting a location near Palmer Court later this year, which is transitional housing. For people that don't live in those developments that still use services for disadvantaged individuals, they'll be able to get a $5 equity pass. They'll be able to pay in cash, so that allows the unbanked community to participate. You don't need a cell phone, you don't need a credit card. $5 in quarters or whatever is fine. We also have new products coming out for everybody. Starting in July, anybody that has an annual pass or anybody that gets a new annual pass will be able to take out the bike for 12 hours at a time. You can currently take it out for 1 hour at a time, but this gives people more flexibility. They can go somewhere where there isn't a station, they can take it overnight if they need to, just make it easier for work. And the nice part is that it provides a little more security because every basket already has a cable lock inside. So if you take this somewhere and you need to make sure that you have transportation on the way back and somebody else doesn't pick it up, you have that security. If you use even our stations in some areas or like one of the dockless products, you could end up having to take a $10 or $15 Uber or Lyft, and we're trying to make sure that doesn't happen. E-bikes coming out this fall. This is Trek's first shareable e-bike, so it's really high quality. E-bikes are complicated. Just a few weeks ago, the City Bike program in New York that was purchased by Lyft had to recall all of their e-bikes. It's really expensive. You see e-bikes getting pulled from different cities all over the country, but Trek is a billion-dollar bike company, and I'm really, really excited. I've had a chance to try this. High-end products will be out later this year. And just to wrap it up, we're doing an 81% system expansion this year. It's mostly housing, affordable, market rate, workforce, track stops, Liberty Park, 9th and 9th, office towers. And then next year we have locations going in at the Marmalade Library, more apartments, more light rail. And then, just to give you some perspective, I know that doesn't mean anything because it's so small, but that's the map of the plans for the next few years, and everything inside that blue area is 2 square miles. That's our current system, and over the next 18 months, we'll be expanding to roughly a 14 square mile system. That's it. That was a lot of stuff, though.
I just want to say thank you. I think this is a great program. I really appreciate all of the work that you're doing for all of our different communities. I really appreciate being thoughtful about our unbanked communities, which oftentimes are unsheltered communities as well. And this is the way that they can participate in sort of everyday activities. And it's important that we are thinking of all of those different communities. And I appreciate the creativity and thoughtfulness there.
Oh, thank you.
So thank you. I will open it up to questions from council members.
May I?
Please.
I wish we had our full council here with us because this was a great presentation. Thank you for being brief. You're the only thing between us and dinner before our formal meeting.
Had a lot of coffee.
And it's such a different program than the venture capital funded dockless systems, which have their place in our city.
Absolutely.
Too. This is a really different system, really different purpose. And what stood out to me was of the themes, the brand themes that the community generated. 3 of those, quality and reliability, safety, and a community focus, are exemplary, are examples of what set Green Bike apart from the other systems. So.
Oh, thank you. We appreciate that.
Good job.
Yeah. Anna?
Yeah, thank you, Ben, also for meeting on one-on-one with the rest of us.
Oh, thank
so
you.
that we could have a more, like a little bit, just one-on-one conversations about market, about things that we do. Just in general, so everything looks great. I was wondering if there's, if you've been thinking about how to continue market the green bikes, but from an air quality perspective. Kind of like what sustainability that's like, hey, if today you eat, something came up yesterday, if you don't eat a steak or meat for a day, or if you eat vegetables for 2 days, then this is what you're saving. But anything like that, if you were to ride your bike, this is what you would, you would
sure. Absolutely. We try and, our current marketing campaign is called Why I Ride.
Okay.
So all of our stuff in City Weekly or Slug Magazine, basically there are only a few real reasons that people ride, right?
Okay.
There's your health.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the calorie piece. That's what Select Health cares the most about.
Right.
And then there's the air quality, which is why a lot of people ride.
Okay.
And we really try and explain, we've removed something in the range of 5-6 million local vehicle miles. It's about 4.5 million pounds of CO2 so far. And it factors in for not just people riding the bikes, but about 14% of our users have reduced the number of cars in their household.
Okay.
So we try and put that stuff out there, but we could always be doing more.
Yeah, it would be really helpful to kind of have those, when you have those sponsored ads
Oh,
to say,
absolutely.
hey, if you use Greenbike, this is what you're, how you're contributing. So
Thank you.
I just want to follow up real quick and then probably wrap it up. But will you remind me to reach out to me? There is a Microsoft pilot program that we should all talk about that I just learned about
Sounds
when
awesome.
I was up there. So about air quality and bikes. So
Okay.
that I needed to say that before I forgot. Anything else? Excellent. So thank you.
thank you.
John, did you want to say anything?
Yeah, sure. I just want to kind of reemphasize when Jen and I were here maybe about a month ago that we really see Green Bike as kind of the stable core of the shared mobility options in Salt Lake. That we're great with some of the other for-profit companies that can help kind of push the envelope and they innovate, but Green Bike throughout all of that, as teasing Ben that his motto for 2019 should be, we're still here. Because they're still have a very strong following and, they're not, really the biggest complaint that I've heard from others about Green Bike is that they're not growing fast enough. And really that's just a matter of resources. But, I think kudos to them for not going beyond what they're capable of and just year after year, just getting a little bit better. And that's something that, I think we ought to support.
Thank you.
Oops.
Thank you.
Thank you
My
again for being
pleasure.
here. Thank you for your patience. And I think it's on the agenda for our formal meeting. So
Thank
okay.
you.
Thank
Enjoy
you
your
guys.
evening.
Do we have any reports from the executive director? That's
Very quickly, just
Sorry.
in writing there, you have, on your May 7th meeting, you will have the youth city government students here to schedule a youth state of the city, to present a youth state of the city report. They always really enjoy having dinner with the council members, and so we have scheduled it for downstairs at City Bird, so that that's more conducive to visiting.
Okay.
The end.
Number 12, no closed session. We're good to go, kids. We out.